it's August. This is the month when we say happy birthday to our Unity co-founders Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. Here they are with their birth dates. Charles was born August 22nd, 1854, and Myrtle was born on August 6th, 1845. So we'll be saying happy birthday to her tomorrow. They're the reason we're here this morning, because each of us found something in what they created that really speaks to us and has made a positive difference in the way we live. And it all started back in 1889 when Charles and Myrtle published this magazine that they called Modern Thought. They were operating out of the living room of their home in Kansas City, Missouri. Charles was a self-educated real estate broker, and Myrtle was a school teacher and a housewife. So we have a few pictures here from the Unity archives just to show you a little bit more. That's Myrtle in her younger days. And then let's see, and then there she is a little later on. And next we have, there's Charles, young Charles, looking very intense and serious. Most of the pictures he looks intense and serious until he gets older. Then he mellows out a little bit. He tried a beard at one point, and a wild walrus mustache there. And then we have, this is a group picture of them, Charles and Myrtle over here on this side with some people at some kind of a tent revival meeting, and Charles still has the beard in that picture. Let's see what we have here. Oh, this is the whole family. That's of course Myrtle, Charles, and that's Charles' mother, Mary. They were fortunate. She came to live with them, and because of that, Myrtle was freed up to do all of the Unity work that she did. Mary did all the cooking and house cleaning, and Myrtle and Charles lived in a little house that still exists at Unity Village, a house with no kitchen, because Mary lived right across the street, and she did all the cooking and everything. So it was a nice arrangement. And the other picture behind them, those were their sons, Rickert, Lowell, and Royal Fillmore. Yeah, there they are in the back there. Oh. Okay, now we're ready for the anniversary picture. This is, I believe this was from I believe this was their 50th wedding anniversary. They're all dressed up special, and let's see what else we have here. And those are their official portraits. Charles and Myrtle each sitting at their desks, and those desks are still exactly where they were back then and pretty much as they were at the time. So I believe that's the last one that we have of them. I should remember these things. Yes, all right. So Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, two folks that would seem to be kind of unlikely candidates to start a spiritual movement like this. Myrtle was raised in a religious family, but she refused to join her family's church because she didn't like the teachings. She couldn't accept those teachings, and she wrote a letter to a friend in 1928, which kind of summarizes some of the issues that she had. She said, "I marveled that my wonderful mother, who loved so devotedly, could have a God who might punish or take the lives of his children." She never officially joined that church, and then she was later quoted as saying the other thing up there. She said, "There was something in me that protested against the declaration that I was by nature evil and sinful," which is a message we sometimes get from traditional churches. Original sin, we're worms in the dust, that kind of stuff. And Charles wasn't much on religion either. He was raised near an Indian reservation in St. Cloud, Minnesota, before it became a state, so he was out on the edge of the wild frontier. There were no schools or much in the way of churches at the time, so he received no formal education, and church was obviously not a priority. So like Myrtle, he had no real embedded religious background, which is a good thing because they hadn't been programmed. They had little in the way of embedded theology that they'd have to get rid of before they did what they went on to do. And probably the main reason that Unity came to be was because Myrtle came down with tuberculosis. And we have to remember that the practice of medicine in this country in the 1880s was still in its infancy in those days. It was basically pre-scientific. It was unregulated. There were lots of snake oil peddlers and quacks who would pass them off as doctors. no antibiotics, no truly effective anesthesia. All of that came along after the turn of the century. No vaccines or anything like that. If someone got sick and if they were in pain, they used opiates, morphine, laudanum, and things like that to help keep them comfortable. And about all the doctor could do other than that was to prescribe rest, a proper diet, hydration, and things like that so the body could heal itself. Tuberculosis, they were just starting treatment in sanitariums at the time. The only one in existence when Myrtle came down with it was somewhere out on the East Coast. I want to say New York or something like that. So she was on her own, and she was desperate to find some help, so she took matters into her own hands. She used a system of positive affirmations and positive prayer where she thought of herself as teaching her body that it was not subject to the limitations of this illness. And she would declare to it that it was spiritually strong and whole despite the symptoms that she was experiencing. And it worked. The disease disappeared. They didn't think she'd live much beyond her 40s. She lived until 1931 when she was 86 years old. Now today, we have effectively eradicated TB via vaccines and other forms of prevention and treatment, and we also know that TB has a remission rate of around 29%, even without treatment. So we would probably call what Myrtle did with her healing part of the expectation effect or placebo effect, that kind of a thing, spontaneous remission, but that's all they had at the time. And so she worked with it. And the point is that she took action to make sure that she was part of the 29% who would survive rather than the 71% who didn't. It became Myrtle's personal mission and ministry of healing and helping and nurturing and teaching. That's where that led for her. She was the driving force behind an organization that started out with the name the Society of Silent Help, which we know today as the Silent Unity Prayer Ministry, which was the first 24/7. First of all, it was a prayer ministry by writing letters, and then it became a prayer ministry via telephone, and that came into being. But it's the oldest one on earth that does that, 24/7. You call that number, someone is there to pray with you. And another one of her gifts to the world was her work with children. And she firmly believed that children were getting the wrong message about the nature of life and death and spirituality and so on. So in 1893, she became the editor of a monthly magazine for children that was called Wee Wisdom. And some of us here might remember it. It's no longer in publication, but she also wrote a book in 1896 called Wee Wisdom's Way. It was a children's book. Now, this was back in the days when religious education consisted basically of feeding children these stories about demons, devils, hellfire, designed by a God who would punish disobedient children, right? Which is a form of child abuse, if you ask me. Now, Charles also had some health problems. You might have heard the story about how when he was a boy, he dislocated his hip in an ice skating accident. And again, due to the lack of effective, competent medical care, the hip socket was destroyed, and he had to wear a leg brace for much of his life. Now today, hip replacements are common, but not back in those days. So he ended up having to, he started out with crutches, and then a leg brace and a cane. And when he witnessed what happened to Myrtle with her healing, he decided to investigate, and he was a skeptic. He had no interest in religion because all he could see was conflict and contradiction. So instead of blindly accepting things based on the say-so of someone who claimed to have divine authority, who had a direct channel to God or something like that, he decided to figure things out for himself. And of course, he also used the example of Myrtle Fillmore, who actually demonstrated that this healing was possible. Charles was actually following in the footsteps of some other free thinkers who had come before him. And I'm thinking about people like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. They challenged the religious, social, and political values of the time, and Charles actually quotes Emerson in many of his own books. So if we want to get some idea of where Charles was coming from, it helps to take a look at some of the things that Emerson wrote, specifically in this essay called Self-Reliance. Here are some of the things he said. He said, "I am ashamed to think how easily we capitulate to badges and names, to large societies and dead institutions." In fact, he gave a somewhat similar address at the Harvard Divinity School, and they were up in arms. He was talking about dead institutions and things like that. They were not happy with him for that. He also said, "Nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind." And finally, "Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles." So principles, integrity of mind, and not capitulating to the claims of authority. Those were the core values that were expressed by Emerson, which deeply influenced Charles Fillmore. So Charles was really building on the ideas of those who came before him, and they in turn were building on the ideas of people who had came before them. That's how it works. And I think it's a good thing that we honor and celebrate the Fillmores and our other intellectual ancestors, so long as we don't put them on a pedestal and turn them or their ideas into idols to be worshipped. You know, one of the things that really impressed me when I first visited Unity Village back in the late 90s was that you don't see the Fillmores being treated as guru figures. You go there, and there is a gallery of portraits. The Fillmores' portraits are among them. Other family members are there as well. It's in the hallway outside the archives, which is appropriate, and that's about it. In fact, nobody really knows where they're buried or where their ashes were interred. And I think that was, again, on purpose, because they didn't want people making pilgrimages to a burial site. They didn't want any guru worship in Unity. You know, Sir Isaac Newton once said a couple of interesting things here. He said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." And another one from Sir Isaac that goes along with it, he says, "Plato is my friend, Aristotle is my friend, but my greatest friend is truth." So, we don't have to blindly accept everything the Fillmores said. They wanted us to know that our greatest friend is truth. And that's what life was for Charles, was a search for truth. Each generation gets to decide which ideas still make sense and which ones are still supported by demonstration and evidence. We can do that. It's our right to do that. That's what it means by what we mean by self-reliance. And even if certain ideas and concepts have run their course, we can still acknowledge their vital role in our human development and evolution. You know, Charles wrote about a number of things that we don't teach anymore because they don't withstand the test of practical application. And that's what Charles was all about. An idea had to be practical, it had to be tested, it had to pan out in the real world. Here's something that Charles wrote in 1918 describing Unity's approach to truth. He said, speaking of unity, he said, "It is in this respect totally different from the other religious systems of the world because it does not, in any respect, rest its authority upon revelation. It has no dogmas or creeds, nor are its students expected to believe anything which they cannot logically demonstrate to be true." That's a freeing statement. You know what they say about dogma, right? Beware of dogma. So Charles wanted Unity to be a dogma-free zone. Dogma is a pronouncement by a religious authority that you have to accept without any dispute. Unity is meant to be a dogma-free zone. That was one of the groundbreaking ideas that the Fillmores helped to advance in the world. And it was a radical statement at the time because, as we know, most religions insisted that if something contradicted Scripture or the pronouncement of some clerical authority, Scripture and authority wins. Which is why it took 350 years for the Catholic Church to officially acknowledge that Galileo was correct when he claimed that the earth moved around the sun instead of the other way around. Now another thing, Charles used the word revelation in that quote. He said it does not in any respect rest its authority upon revelation. He wasn't just talking about the book of Revelation that we find in the Bible. The kind of revelation that he was referring to is what happens when a person or a group of people claim that God or some other supernatural entity gave them a special message, special knowledge, or special truth. Sometimes we call it a special revelation. For example, the Book of Mormon was a special revelation given to Joseph Smith. The Quran was a special revelation given to Muhammad. Many books of the Bible, especially Revelation, right, are written as special revelations direct from God to the author. And it still goes on today. There are many New Age books which claim to be special revelations from, I don't know, invisible aliens and supernatural entities. And think about what happens if every group were to rely on their own special revelation for truth and knowledge that's not subject to objective, logical demonstration. That's sure going to make communication difficult, isn't it? If everybody has their own special little revelation, they're in their special little bubbles, we're creating more separation. We're making communication more difficult. And I think human progress is virtually impossible without free inquiry and open communication. So the Fillmores were onto something here. And I think it's a major part of their enduring legacy. Now, another groundbreaking idea that they helped to advance is this notion that our thinking plays a major role in our experience of reality. Now, this piece has been misinterpreted in New Age circles as saying that we create our own reality. All right? I cannot create a reality that is not subject to the law of gravity. I cannot create a reality that is not subject to the arrow of time. All right? Omelets do not turn back into eggs, no matter how much I think or feel that they can. In the real world of the laws of physics, positive does not attract positive. They actually repel each other. Opposites are what attract in the real world under the laws of physics. It's how magnetism works. What I can reliably create is my experience of reality. Sometimes gravity and the arrow of time can get us down, if you know what I mean. Wrinkles, sagging, and some of the let's call them the blessings of age, which don't always feel so good. You know, gravity and time. Well, it's all easier to deal with if we do the work that it takes to change the way we think about those things. That's the real task. There's a paragraph from an article that talks about this concept that they call new thought. And I think I'll kind of bring things to a close today with this little quote here. It says, "New thought is about shepherding your thoughts so they don't run wild despite appearances. You might have every human reason for feeling negative, but new thought asks you to make the outrageous choice to line up thoughts that make you feel positive anyway. Acting can make you feel better, but before you will change your acting, your thinking will have to change at least a little bit. Change your thoughts, and the feelings will follow." Doesn't mean we're living in denial, right? We're doing some work. We're learning how to discern. That's what new thought is. It's a discernment process. We have to learn how to discern between the things that are more or less in our control and the things that are beyond our control. And that's where we'll pick up next week as we take a deeper look into how these ideas can be helpful when it comes to health and healing. So we'll see you then. Thank you.